The evening started like any other. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes after dinner, when the front door swung open. Sarah walked in, her cheeks flushed, her hair damp and clinging to her neck. She claimed she'd been out for a run, but something about her energy felt off. She kicked off her sneakers, tossed her hoodie onto the couch, and grabbed a water bottle from the counter, her breathing heavy but uneven. "Good run?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I glanced up from the sink. "Yeah," she said quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Just needed to clear my head." Her tone was clipped, almost defensive. I didn't press her, but as she moved past me, a faint smell hit my nose. Alcohol, subtle but unmistakable, mingling with the scent of sweat. But I stayed quiet, watching her head toward the bathroom. "I'm hopping in the shower," she called over her shoulder, already halfway down the hall. I followed her with my gaze, my eyes catching on a dark, damp spot on the back of her shorts. It was small but noticeable, right at the center of her lower back. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe she'd sat on something wet, or it was just sweat. But the excuses felt hollow, and a gnawing suspicion began to take root. The bathroom door didn't latch completely, and the sound of the shower running filled the house. I hovered nearby, my curiosity morphing into something heavier. Through the narrow gap in the door, I saw her pull off her shirt and toss it aside. When she stepped out of her shorts, my breath caught. She wasn't wearing underwear. Nothing at all. Sarah wasn't the type to forget something like that. She was meticulous, almost obsessive about details. The sight felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place, but the picture it revealed was one I didn't want to see. I stepped back before she could notice me, my heart pounding in my chest. The smell of alcohol, the damp spot, the missing underwear, it all added up to something I couldn't ignore. I stood there, frozen, grappling with what to do. Confront her? Wait for an explanation? Or let this moment fester, knowing it would eat at me until I cracked? Whatever was happening, it wasn't just an ordinary evening run. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready to face. I moved toward the bathroom door, my curiosity hardening into resolve. Sarah had left her shorts in a crumpled heap near the sink, her phone peeking out from one of the pockets. I hesitated, glancing at the crack in the door where steam was starting to escape. She wouldn't hear me, not over the sound of the shower. Without overthinking it, I reached into the pocket, pulled out her phone, and slipped back into the living room. My hands were steady, my breathing calm, as if my body knew what it was doing, even if my mind was still catching up. I sank into the couch, turned on the phone, and the screen lit up. A flood of notifications greeted me, but one stood out immediately. "I can still feel your touch. When can I see you again? Jason." The calm inside me shattered, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I swiped to unlock the phone. She hadn't changed her passcode, either out of carelessness or overconfidence, and went straight to her messages. Jason's name sat at the top of her recent threads, bold and unapologetic. I tapped on it, and the conversation unfolded before me. It wasn't subtle. "You were amazing," Jason had written just hours earlier. "You have no idea what you do to me," Sarah replied. I scrolled further, and the story began to unravel. Weeks of exchanges, escalating from playful banter to intimate confessions. Plans to meet at hotels, a bar I recognized as one she claimed her running group frequented, and even a mention of a weekend trip she'd said was for self-care. Photos followed, none explicit, but all too personal to misinterpret. A candid shot of Jason smirking at the camera, another of their hands entwined over a table. It wasn't just physical. The tone of their messages was warm, filled with pet names and inside jokes. He wasn't some meaningless fling. He was someone she trusted, confided in. Someone she gave a piece of herself I thought was still mine. My thumb hovered over the screen as I read one of the latest messages. "I can't wait to hold you again," Jason had typed. "Soon," Sarah had replied. "I'll find a way. I always do for you." The weight of her words sank into me, and the cold reality of what I was reading settled deep. I set the phone down, my breathing steady, but inside, a quiet fury was rising. This wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate, calculated, and months in the making. I looked toward the bathroom, the sound of water still pouring, and made my decision. Tonight, the veil had lifted, and there was no unseeing the truth. Whatever came next, it was no longer about her choices, it was about mine. I was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in my hand, when she finally emerged from the bathroom. Her damp hair clung to her neck, and a faint haze of steam followed her into the room. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted toward the table, searching. "Have you seen my phone?" she asked, her tone casual, almost dismissive. I held it up, making sure she saw it clearly. Her expression flickered for a split second. Surprise, maybe irritation, before settling into an unsettling calm. She walked over and slumped into the chair across from me, her limbs sprawled out awkwardly. She looked like a marionette with its strings cut, her posture loose and almost deliberately careless. Her eyes, though slightly glazed, carried a defiant arrogance. "So," she said, her voice slow and measured, as though she were testing the waters. "What do you want me to say?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I simply stared at her. Her lack of remorse was staggering, as if she didn't care, or worse, as if she thought none of it mattered. "Say something honest," I replied, my tone sharp and cold. "That would be a start." She laughed softly, the sound dry and humorless. "Honest," she repeated, leaning back in the chair. "You've already gone through my phone, haven't you? What's the point?" "The point," I said, leaning forward, "is that I want to hear it from you. No excuses, no dodging. Just the truth." She tilted her head, studying me as though deciding whether I was worth the effort. "Fine," she said finally, her lips curling into a faint mocking smile. "Yes, I've been seeing someone. You already know that, so why pretend this conversation is about discovery?" Her words were like a slap, but I didn't flinch. "Why?" I asked simply. She shrugged, the gesture casual, as though the question didn't deserve serious consideration. "Why not? You're always working, always busy, always so serious. I wanted something else." "Something else," I repeated, my voice tight. "That's your justification?" She sighed, as if the conversation was exhausting her. "You wouldn't understand." I stared at her, the disbelief simmering into anger. "You think I wouldn't understand? You think sneaking around, lying, and throwing away everything we've built is beyond my comprehension?" Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of unease breaking through her mask of confidence. "I didn't throw it away," she muttered. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "But it did," I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "You made choices, Sarah. Over and over again. Don't stand there and pretend it just happened." Her shoulders sagged slightly, but the defiance in her eyes remained. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "You've been so distant. It's like you're here, but you're not really here." "Don't you dare make this about me," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've been here. I've tried. I've asked you if something was wrong, if there was something we needed to talk about, and every time, you lied to my face." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating. "I want you to leave," I said finally, my voice steady but full of finality. "Tonight." Her eyes widened, the arrogance slipping away. "What?" she said, the first real crack in her composure appearing. "You heard me," I said, standing up. "Pack your things and go. Stay with him, stay with a friend. I don't care. But you're not staying here." Her lips parted as if to argue, but she saw something in my face that stopped her. She slumped back in the chair, her earlier confidence replaced by a quiet defeat. The weight of her betrayal hung between us like a wall, impenetrable and unmovable. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. This was the end of whatever we'd once been. After she disappeared into the bedroom, I sat in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the table as though it might anchor me. Her phone lay in front of me, dark and silent, its presence an unwanted reminder of everything I had uncovered. The air in the room felt heavier than before, and the ticking of the clock was the only sound as my thoughts churned. Anger bubbled up first, sharp, cutting, and all-consuming. It wasn't just her betrayal, it was the way she had sat there, arrogant and unapologetic, treating everything we'd built as though it was disposable. My anger didn't flare long, though. Like fire on dry wood, it burned hot and fast, leaving behind an emptiness I couldn't ignore. Then came the sadness, a deep, bone-crushing weight that settled in my chest. It wasn't just about the infidelity. It was about all the lies that had led to this moment, the betrayal of trust that could never be rebuilt. Every memory we'd created now felt tainted, every shared moment twisted into something unrecognizable. I thought of all the times I'd trusted her, chosen to believe her vague explanations, brushed off my instincts because I didn't want to seem controlling or paranoid. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt, not wanting to believe she was capable of this. Now, every instance of my trust felt like a knife in my back. I stood and paced the room, trying to process the enormity of what needed to happen next. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend with promises or tears. It cracks the foundation, and without that foundation, everything crumbles. I walked to the bedroom and stood in the doorway. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone, her posture relaxed as if nothing had happened. The sight made my blood boil. "You need to leave," I said firmly, my voice steady but loud enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. She glanced up at me, a frown forming. "What are you talking about?" I said, "You need to leave. Pack your things and go. Tonight." Her face twisted in disbelief, then anger. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I replied, crossing my arms. "You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. You don't get to stay here, not after everything you've done." She stood, her arms flailing slightly as she spoke. "Where am I supposed to go? You think you can just kick me out like this?" "That's exactly what I'm doing," I said, unmoved by her indignation. "I don't care where you go. Call him, call a friend, get a hotel. I don't care. But you're not staying here." Her mouth opened, then closed as if searching for a rebuttal. "This is my house too," she finally said, her voice rising. I shook my head. "Not anymore. You forfeited that right when you decided to betray me. I'm giving you 1 hour to pack some of your things and leave, or I'll pack them myself." Her expression faltered, the bravado cracking just enough for me to see the fear behind it. But I didn't waver. I couldn't. This was the line I needed to draw, not just for her but for myself. She stood there, staring at me, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, she turned and began grabbing her belongings. The sound of drawers opening and slamming shut echoed through the house as I stood in the doorway, watching to make sure she didn't linger. When she finally left, dragging a suitcase behind her, she didn't look back. The sound of the door closing behind her felt like both an ending and a beginning. The house was quiet, painfully so, but it was a quiet I could live with, a quiet that promised peace, even if it came at a cost. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. The sadness lingered, but so did something else. Resolve. I had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to start picking up the pieces of my life. Alone, but honest. And that was enough. By the time the afternoon sun poured through the windows, the house was eerily silent. Her absence was palpable, and yet, it felt like the air was easier to breathe. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the now empty chair where she had pleaded for another chance just hours ago. Her words echoed in my mind, empty apologies, promises that had come too late. I had stood firm, told her to leave, and watched as she packed her things with defiance masking her defeat. The sound of the door closing behind her was still fresh in my memory, a sharp, final click that seemed to reverberate through the walls. It was a sound I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for, a sound that marked the end of something I'd been clinging to long after it had already died. For the first time in what felt like months, I wasn't second-guessing myself. There was no knot of anxiety in my chest, no lingering doubt about whether I'd made the right decision. I knew I had. Her betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a series of choices that unraveled everything we'd built together. Trust, once broken, isn't something you can piece back together with apologies or tears. It's like shattering a mirror. You can glue the pieces back, but the cracks will always be there, a constant reminder of what was lost. And I wasn't willing to live with those cracks. I sat at the table, the sunlight reflecting off its surface, and opened my phone. Her number was still saved, her photo still staring back at me from old text threads. Without hesitation, I deleted it. Then I went further, removing her from every social media account, every shared app, every corner of my digital life where her presence still lingered. It wasn't about bitterness or revenge. It was about reclaiming my space, my peace, and my sense of self. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is where it ends." I decided to file for divorce immediately. There was no point in dragging it out, no point in pretending there was anything left to salvage. The paperwork felt like a formality, a final step in a process that had been set in motion long before I'd even realized it. I called a lawyer, scheduled a consultation, and began gathering the documents I'd need. It was strange how methodical it all felt, like I was dismantling a life brick by brick. But with each step, I felt a little more in control, a little more like myself. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I moved through the house, cleaning up the remnants of her presence. An old scarf on the coat rack, a pair of shoes left by the door, a half-empty bottle of her favorite perfume on the dresser. It all went into a box, ready to be taken out with the trash. With each item I removed, the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a refuge. It wasn't quite home yet, but it was getting there. The walls seemed to breathe easier, the rooms less cluttered, the air less heavy. It was as if the house itself was exhaling, relieved to be free of the tension that had been building for months. That evening, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space across from me. The silence was overwhelming, but it wasn't unbearable. It was the kind of quiet that allowed thoughts to settle, that gave room for clarity. I thought about the life we'd shared, the promises we'd made, and how easily she had discarded them. It wasn't love that had failed, it was her commitment to it. Love requires effort, honesty, and trust, things she had stopped giving long before I'd realized it. And while it hurt to admit, I knew I deserved better. I deserved someone who wouldn't take what we had for granted, someone who would fight for us as hard as I had. Over the next few days, I began piecing my life back together. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in months, explained what had happened, and found their support unwavering. They reminded me of who I was before her betrayal had taken over my thoughts, before I'd become so consumed with trying to fix something that was beyond repair. They reminded me that I was more than the sum of my mistakes, more than the person she had made me feel like in those final, painful months. I started reclaiming the hobbies I'd put aside, filling my evenings with activities that reminded me of who I was before all of this. I picked up my guitar again, the calluses on my fingers long gone but the muscle memory still there. I went for long runs, the kind that left me breathless and aching but also clear-headed and alive. I even started cooking again, experimenting with recipes I'd bookmarked but never tried. It was strange how much joy I found in these small, simple things, things I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I had them back. The nights were still difficult. Lying in the quiet darkness, it was hard not to replay the moments that had led to this. The late nights, the missed calls, the lies I had wanted so desperately to believe. But each morning brought a little more distance, a little more clarity. The pain didn't go away, but it became easier to carry. It became a part of me, like a scar that would always be there but no longer hurt to touch. As the weeks passed, I began to feel lighter. The house transformed into a space that reflected me, not the shadow of a broken marriage. I took down old photos, rearranged the furniture, and made it my own. Each small change was a declaration. I was moving forward. I was choosing myself, my happiness, my future. And with each step, I felt a little more like the person I used to be. The person I still was, beneath the layers of hurt and doubt. Looking back, I see now that her betrayal wasn't the end of my life. It was the end of a chapter, one that had to close so I could start anew. Trust is fragile, and once it's gone, love alone isn't enough to hold a relationship together. I've learned that the hard way, but I've also learned something far more important. Walking away isn't failure. It's strength. It's the courage to say, I deserve better, and the resolve to go out and find it. Today, I stand on the other side of heartbreak, not unscathed but stronger. The pain lingers, but so does hope. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new one. And while I don't know what the future holds, I know this much. I'm ready for it. I'm ready to rebuild, to rediscover, to reclaim the life I almost lost. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the hardest but most necessary step you can take. What do you think? Was this the right choice? I'd love to hear your thoughts.